The universe is a rerun, and you've lived this life before. I've been here before. Same crosswalk, same ringtone, same gut drop as her name lights my phone. If I answer, I keep the job and lose the friend. If I don't, I keep my soul and torch my career. I know the ending because I've already lived it. The universe reruns. Your choices feel new, but they aren't. And there's one date carved into a telescope's log that proves how a single policy can bend what we see. Cosmology and computing just hit an inflection point. To understand the loop and what it does to us, we have to rewind. Enter the investigation. Take a breath with me. We're stepping off that curb and into a chase that runs through labs, cockpits, operating rooms, and data centers. This isn't dinner table philosophy. It's personal. Who you are when your world repeats, whether your choices mean anything when the corridor always looks the same, what responsibility demands when outcomes rhyme. Agency, ethics, identity. Those aren't abstract words if the tape rebroadcasts without memory. We're not guessing our way through this. We're treating it like an investigation. We start where the loop is felt, the tiny stutter of déjà vu, the uncanny fluency under pressure, the line of dialogue you swear you've heard a beat before. We collect testimony from people who live close to the edge, pilots, programmers, nurses. Then we drag those stories across what the brain actually does under stress. We'll hold their moments up to hippocampal indexing, familiarity signals, and predictive processing, so we don't turn a neural timing error into cosmic fate. Meanwhile, we climb the scale, instruments listening to the universe's oldest light, the cosmic microwave background, have returned maps that are almost too smooth, sprinkled with tiny bumps. A few teams keep pointing at faint rings and odd alignments. Other teams show how calibration, masks, and beam shapes can draw phantoms you want to believe. We'll keep our footing. What's verified, what's contested, and what would even count as evidence. Then the frameworks. We'll lay out 5 suspects and their clocks, conformal cyclic cosmology, Roger Penrose's chain of aeons with whispers from before, eternal inflation's bubbling multiverse with no common time, Poincaré recurrence in finite systems with absurd timescales, many worlds with branches instead of replays, and the simulation hypothesis, which Nick Bostrom framed in 2003 as a 3-way constraint on what's coherent to believe. Each gives us a different way reality could encourage returns. Each has a cost. Underneath them all, we follow heat, entropy's one-way push, through black holes and horizons to ask the blunt question: does information ever truly die? The modern view says no in principle, even if recovery is intractable. That matters for resets. A rewind without recoverable memory feels like new life to a person. To physics, it's the same evolution rewritten. And then the hinge, a date buried in a pipeline freeze for a major sky release, a policy shift that quietly changed which patterns survived. No villains, just incentives, budgets, and deadlines acting like a hidden clock. We'll keep this human. We'll return to the nurse who faces the same impossible triage twice, the pilot who flares early because the air smells like a memory, the programmer whose hands move before her mind catches up. We'll ask what responsibility means inside constraints. We'll say where the evidence is thin, and we'll nail down what's firm. Ready? Let's start where the loop first shows itself, in the strange return of old patterns. What happened? The strange return of old patterns. Start small and fast. A cargo pilot on night approach into Anchorage feels the soft push of wind shear 3 seconds before the alert. He flares early, catches a glide he swears he's already flown, and lands clean. Stakes: 30 tons of steel at 140 knots, lives and freight balanced on instinct. Afterward, he can't shake the certainty that he didn't predict, he remembered. Across the country, a senior programmer watches a production system freeze under load. She opens a terminal, fires 5 exact commands, clears a hidden lock, and rescues millions of dollars in minutes. Logs show the specific failure never happened before. She insists it has. The feeling is cold and precise, again. In a hospital ward, a patient surfaces from anesthesia, emotional and laughing, insisting the surgeon is about to say, "Well, that's one for the case conference." 30 seconds later, the surgeon says it verbatim. A coincidence? Maybe. But the chart notes it, and similar moments cluster under stress, novelty, and fatigue. Okay, people feel loops. What does the brain say? Memory isn't a tape, it's a construction. The hippocampus tries to index what happened where and when. The parahynal cortex flags familiarity. Prefrontal circuits ask whether what's happening fits the model the brain is already running. Under pressure, those channels can desynchronize by a few hundred milliseconds. Familiarity fires before conscious recognition, and the mind backfills a memory of the present as past. Predictive processing adds a layer. The brain constantly simulates the next beat. When the world lines up exactly with the forecast, it can feel like recall rather than prediction. That's a timing story, not a cosmic one. Still, repeats exist in systems we can study. Drop a marble into a strange attractor and it traces the same lacy territory without landing on the exact path. Climate cycles, cardiac rhythms, ecosystems, markets, and brains slide into limit cycles when constraints and feedback push them back toward familiar tracks. Small nudges can kick them to a new groove. The basin pulls them home. That's not proof the universe rewinds. It's a warning. Under constraints, behavior repeats. Zoom out. In the oldest light, the cosmic microwave background, some groups have reported low-variance circles and curious alignments. Others argue the statistics and selection are off, or that foreground cleaning and beam affects paint patterns you want to see. What's solid? The power spectrum, the acoustic peaks, the parameters that anchor the standard model. What's debated lives at the margins, where faint structure might whisper or noise might tease. Either way, the urge to see cycles is strong. Stakes again. If repeats reflect structure in the world, not just quirks in our heads, then accountability gets tricky. Are you responsible for a choice inside a corridor that always funnels you to the same ledge? What happens to justice when contexts regenerate? If it's only the brain's timing, then we owe ourselves the discipline not to mistake a neural hiccup for destiny. While pilots felt wind and patients mouthed lines, people in clean rooms argued over masks, beams, and cross-calibration. Each improvement to the pipeline changed the interpretation. Looser cleaning left room for patterns. Stricter cleaning smoothed edges into safety. The fight wasn't only in the sky. It was in the software that decides what the sky looks like. That's where a date would matter. Meanwhile, mathematics carries a whisper. In a finite, isolated system, Poincaré recurrence says the state wanders arbitrarily close to where it's been given absurd time. Practically useless for people, philosophically sticky. And quantum foundations offer a different flavor of repetition. In many worlds, the wave function evolves deterministically. You don't replay, you branch. Yet similar structures can align across branches, making echoes feel plausible without literal resets. Here's the pivot for our investigation. The more we tried to explain away personal loops as glitches, the more we saw environments shepherd repeated choices. Put cues in the same order under pressure, and you'll see the same outcomes, especially from trained experts whose brains have compiled tasks into fast paths. Casinos exploit that. So do apps. So does any corridor that keeps its signals constant. The loop isn't just out there in cosmology or in here in neurons. It lives at the joint between a constrained world and a predictive brain. A micro-story nails the point. Night shift. 2 patients decompensate, 1 ventilator ready. A nurse has 30 seconds. Last month, same hallway, same tone, same supervising voice on the radio. She chose one path and saved both. Tonight, the pattern clicks. Her hands move before the thought finishes. The choice wasn't fate. It was a practiced response in a repeated corridor. Outcomes matched because constraints matched. This was the moment our search changed speed. If loops tighten when constraints lock, someone somewhere can loosen them. And if policies and pipelines act like constraints on what counts as real, then the clocks we care about aren't only in stars. They're in schedules, standards, and software freezes. One last thread to tie the bow before we name a date. Black holes once looked like shredders of information. Now the mainstream view says information is preserved in principle, unitarity survives, even if recovery borders on impossible. That's the cruel symmetry. The universe might never forget, while we, inside it, do. A reset without memory is a rerun that feels new. So people feel loops. Brains can explain a lot. Systems repeat under constraints. The sky is smooth with debated edges, and choices rhyme when corridors don't change. The first time we found a fingerprint of the hidden clock wasn't in a theorem. It was in a policy memo with a timestamp. We're heading there next. Who moved first? The competing theories. To trace the hand on the knob, we line up the suspects, not people, but frameworks that set the timing and the rules for how repeats could show up. Each one carries a built-in clock. Each one stakes a different claim on what again could mean. First, Penrose's conformal cyclic cosmology. In CCC, our universe is one eon in a chain, with the remote future of the previous eon conformally squashed into our Big Bang. When everything massive decays or falls into black holes and those evaporate, only massless radiation remains. Without mass, scale loses meaning, so you can map an endless, cold future onto a hot new start. Penrose laid out the full framework in Cycles of Time, 2010. Stakes: if that mapping's real, gentle fingerprints from a prior eon could linger in our sky, low-variance circles, and in later work, concentrated Hawking points, tied to final black hole evaporation, published in 2018 by Meissner and Penrose. Action: teams looked for concentric rings and anomalous spots in WMAP and Planck maps. Others argued the statistics, masks, and selection effects undercut the claims. Impact: CCC remains provocative, not proven, but it moved first by giving recurrence a geometry and a clock tied to entropy draining toward a massless future. Meanwhile, eternal inflation sketches a universe that never stops bubbling. Space inflates eternally. Pockets where it ends locally become bubble universes like ours. No universal metronome, each bubble runs on its own time. Stakes: if there are countless bubbles, any arrangement occurs somewhere. Repeats aren't cycles, they're copies scattered in an uncountable multiverse. Action: observers have hunted for bubble collision scars in the CMB. So far, nothing decisive. Impact: it reframes loops as selection, anthropic reasoning rather than reruns, and leaves us without a shared clock to time a repeat you could feel. Then the Poincaré recurrence theorem, the pure math whisper. Finite energy, finite accessible states, and enough time imply the system wanders arbitrarily close to a prior configuration. The catch is brutal. The timescales dwarf heat death, numbers so large they lose meaning for stars, planets, people. Stakes: it grants recurrence in principle and takes it back in practice. Action: the theorem stands untouched. Impact: it keeps the idea of almost again in the conversation while admitting no human consequence. Quantum foundations shift the light again. In the many worlds view, the universal wave function evolves unitarily. Apparent randomness is branching. You don't rewind, you fork. Yet branches can host similar structures, familiar corridors assembled from different microhistories. Stakes: your sense of again could reflect structural echoes, not literal resets. Action: decoherence is tested and robust. Interpretation remains open. Impact: many worlds offers a deterministic clock. Every interaction, everywhere, too dense to map to a single cycle, but suggestive that familiar patterns reappear across branches. Now the loudest suspect in culture, the simulation hypothesis. Bostrom's 2003 trilemma says one of three must hold. Almost all civilizations at our stage go extinct. Almost none run many ancestor simulations, or we are almost certainly in a simulation. Stakes: if reality is computed, loops might be economy, cached states, reused assets, seeded pseudorandomness, or design. Action: people propose tests for discretization or algorithmic biases. Most fail to cleanly separate physics from imagined code. Impact: the hypothesis constrains belief more than it offers evidence. If it's true, the clock, is whatever update cadence the substrate runs. Behind the suspects, a common denominator, entropy. CCC's clock is entropy draining until masslessness erases scale. Eternal inflation's clock fragments into local times with a global measure problem. Poincaré's clock is essentially unreadable. Many worlds' clock is omnipresent but not cyclical. Simulation clocks depend on resource allocation and optimization. If you want a watch you can actually wear, you follow heat. We bench these frameworks against lived moments. The pilot's early flare, predictive control in a stable cockpit, not a whisper from a previous eon. The programmer's instant fix, compiled expertise with the vibe of cache reuse, but neuroscience can carry it, fast paths under pressure. The patient's verbatim anticipation, familiarity firing ahead of indexing. Still, notice how neatly each story grabs a metaphor. Rings in the sky for CCC, copies for inflation, inevitability for recurrence, branches for many worlds, caching for simulation. What nobody in those theory rooms factored in fast enough was the institutional clock. Observatories lock cadence, pipelines freeze, committees standardize. The universe might loop or branch, our instruments definitely schedule. When a policy sets defaults for foreground cleaning or masks, it decides which whispers survive. That's not philosophy, it's calendar. So who moved first? Nature with constraint, minds with prediction, institutions with cadence. CCC says geometry resets. Inflation says bubbles bud forever. Recurrence says time itself is sufficient. Many worlds says the wave function never forgets. Simulation says someone or something optimizes. Entropy cuts through. To reset anything, you pay heat. And in our world, the clocks you feel are the ones tied to energy and budgets. We won't crown a winner. We'll track which suspect makes testable predictions without smuggling in the answer, and which clock actually bites the way a nurse's corridor does. Then we'll watch a quieter force step up, a date stamp on a data freeze that turned a theory debate into an operational fact. The hidden clock, entropy, death, and reset. Follow the heat. That's how you find time's real hands. Every cooling coffee, every server rack sighing warm air, every star burning hydrogen into helium. Entropy keeps the tally. You can make pockets of order, but only by dumping the cost somewhere else. That cost is the arrow. It's the only direction the universe refuses to negotiate. Start with the end everyone pictures, heat death. Keep expanding, thin out matter, flatten temperature differences until there are no gradients left to do work. No gradients, no engines, no clocks you can read. It sounds like a wall. Penrose takes that wall and asks a sharper question. If all that remains are massless quanta, photons, maybe gravitons, then big and small stop meaning anything because mass sets scale. If scale disappears, you can conformally map that endless future onto a new beginning. Whether or not you buy CCC, entropy's push is the metronome beneath it. But the arrow has potholes. Black holes used to look like one. Throw in a library and from the outside you keep just mass, spin, and charge. Hawking's early calculation said the radiation they leak is thermal featureless. That would kill information. If true, physics breaks. Decades of repair later, the mainstream view is different. Information is preserved in principle. Holography says a region's information content scales with area, not volume. Unitarity holds. What falls in gets scrambled across horizons and, in principle, encoded in radiation. Recovery is a nightmare. Preservation wins the case on paper. The mechanism is still on trial. Meanwhile, horizons outside black holes quietly limit memory. In a dark energy-dominated cosmos, you sit inside a de Sitter horizon with a tiny temperature. That horizon behaves like a thermal bath, telling you there's data you can't reach no matter how hard you try. Entanglement stitches spacetime, cut the stitches and what you can know shrinks. That's the emergent spacetime vibe. Geometry tracks information. The arrow isn't just in thermometers, it's in what can ever be reconstructed. So what's a reset under this clock? Not cosmic amnesia. Unitary evolution says the universe never forgets. But if the encoding outruns any agent's ability to recover it, memory dies for all practical purposes. That's the cruel symmetry. Physics keeps the ledger, you don't. A reset, then, is a change of code you can't decode. A rerun that feels new because the address book got scrambled past retrieval. Bring it down a floor where we actually live. Entropy runs our institutions. Satellites run out of coolant, detectors warm and shift. Storage budgets force compression. Pipelines freeze to protect reproducibility, then thaw to patch bugs, then freeze again. Each cycle wipes options. A cleaning tweak that standardizes one survey can erase the only feature a different team was tracking. None of that is conspiracy. It's thermodynamics with spreadsheets. Scarce energy, scarce attention, scarce time. Watch how heat writes policy. When compute gets tight, teams choose stricter foreground models. When storage costs bite, archives flip a compression flag. When mission clocks tick, committees harmonize pipelines to make cross-survey comparisons painless. Every choice reduces degrees of freedom. That's good hygiene and a filter. Entropy doesn't sign the memo. It leans on the hand that does. Black holes give one more lesson that stings like code. If information is never lost, then the universe doesn't need to reset to loop behavior. It needs to funnel dynamics into basins, attractors where states repeat structure, not content. Think of safe modes, defaults, baselines. Complex systems build them because chaos is expensive. The second law rewards reuse. Meanwhile, brains sync to this clock. Psychological time aligns with thermodynamic time because memory is metabolically costly. You write stable traces by burning fuel and dumping heat. Under anesthesia, seizure, or fatigue, the indexing slips. Déjàvu shows up as familiarity firing early. The arrow didn't reverse. The encoder faltered. That's why experts compile tasks into fast paths, cheaper to run, harder to change. When environments keep cues identical, compiled code wins. When environments shift, you need slack to recompile. Slack is what resets eat first. Cities plateau when energy capture rises slower than complexity costs. Labs ossify when marginal discovery per watt falls and everyone retreats to safe bets. Organizations loop when calendars synchronize and no one staggers the load. You measure it with a simple ratio: useful work over heat. When the denominator grows and the numerator stalls, a reset is coming as surely as winter. So how do you steer under a clock like this? You pay the bill early. Build buffers, thermal, budgetary, cognitive, so small surprises don't synchronize into crisis. Preserve raw slices across pipeline freezes so future teams can rerun the past without your fingerprints. Accept nulls as assets, their entropy paid forward, and add good friction where bad loops thrive. Change prompt orders, stagger schedules, alter cadence so compiled habits can't auto-complete into mistakes. Here's the part most people miss. The hidden clock isn't only physics, it's culture. When a field harmonizes standards, you gain clarity and lose edge exploration. When storytelling chases novelty alone, you waste energy reinventing basics. The sustainable move is rhythm, stability at the spine, mutation at the edges. Review cadences that reopen assumptions on purpose. You make space where new structure can form without blowing up the vessel. Follow the heat. It points to where resets will land, to which corridors will repeat, to why a pipeline freeze can matter more than a press release. It also points to the levers you still have. Entropy writes the arrow. You write the schedule, and schedules, unlike laws of nature, can change. The first reveal, a date buried in the sky. Here's the hinge. October 17, 2016. A pipeline freeze. On that day, a major cosmic microwave background team locked their data processing choices and released a cleaned sky most of the field would lean on. Not a new discovery, a decision about how to treat old light. Calendars, not quasars. What changed was quiet but real. Foreground's Milky Way dust, synchrotron haze, moved from a flexible map-by-map fit to a stricter parameter tide scheme. In plain terms, fewer degrees of freedom in the cleaning, harder subtraction on small wiggles, stronger priors for cross-survey comparison. The goal made sense. Reproducibility, lower variance, apples to apples across instruments. But when the switch flipped, some fragile structures softened while other alignments sharpened. No smoking gun, just a reminder that software is part of the telescope. The room where it landed didn't look like history. Fluorescent lights, coffee cups, a projector. An analyst showed Map A older flexible cleaning and Map B harmonized defaults. To the eye, they were almost twins. Then he put up ring detection outputs. A handful of low variance candidates dimmed below thresholds. A few got crisper, most drifted toward noise. The chair asked, "Do parameters move?" The answer was no. The power spectrum and acoustic peaks the spine held. The vote, adopt the standard. Press packet approved. Down the hall, an archivist flagged a footnote that almost no one would read. A compression flag in the nightly ingest flipped to save storage. "Doesn't affect published scales," a reply said. Weeks later, a small team reran a favorite patch and watched a faint ring weaken. They didn't blame the flag, most never knew it changed. The log kept the memory, the culture moved on. This is where incentives act like gravity. Harmonization protects comparability and sanity. It also taxes curiosity. Proposals promising interoperability score higher. Analyses that require bespoke cleaning look risky. Early career researchers learn the defaults. Deviation becomes a specialty you have to defend. Geometric purists worry harsh cleaning erases exactly the low-contrast features they hope could hint at an earlier aeon. Instrumental skeptics breathe easier, fewer false positives. Computational realists ask whether compressibility gets mistaken for noise and get told to show it under the standard. A small ground-based instrument in an odd frequency band found a faint alignment twice, hardware swapped. Before submission, a senior advisor said, "Run the harmonized cleaner so folks can compare." They did. The signal dipped under their pre-registered line. They published both versions in the supplement. Reviewers praised transparency and recommended further study under standards. Press lost interest. Funding lapsed. The lead PI now writes machine learning pipelines for industry. He still wonders if it was weather, wiring, or whisper. None of this is scandal, it's cadence. October 17 didn't change the sky, it changed which features got oxygen. The core stayed rock. The margins, where whispers live, became harder to hear. A policy memo said a beat the field would follow for years. That's a clock you can name, and if you're careful, adjust without shattering trust. The players, three camps shaping the narrative. There isn't a mastermind behind the memo. There are three camps with different reflexes pulling on the same rope. They don't meet in secret. They meet on Zoom, in windowless rooms, in threads that start with quick question and end with policy. Their names aren't on thumbnails. Their instincts are in your data. First, the geometric purists. Their North Star is structure before story. If the cosmos carries faint geometry from an earlier aeon, CCC's low variance rings may be hawking points, then you have to protect the possibility of seeing it. They speak in sky cuts and masks, in cautious language that still sounds like yearning. Their nightmare is a cleaner that treats delicacy as dirt. After the 2016 freeze, they adjusted tactics. Publish ring recovery methods that survive multiple pipelines. Pre-register thresholds that don't collapse when defaults shift. Push for simulations that bake plausible conformal traces into synthetic skies alongside every known systematic. In closed rooms, they're pragmatic. Don't promise Penrose. Protect signal types that standards might thin. They know the field's immune system is right to attack mirages. They also know some truths only show up at the edge of noise. Across the table, the instrumental skeptics. They're the immune system, and they've saved the field more than once. Their reflex is hygiene. If an anomaly shrinks when you change the mask, you ask why the mask changed. If it grows, you check beams, bandpasses, correlated noise, striping, clock drift. They remember past embarrassments by first name. The freeze fit their instincts. Harmonize foreground models, standardize null suites, raise the bar for claims that live in the margins. When the press calls, they pivot back to rock. The power spectrum, acoustic peaks, parameter fits. Their fear is missing a whisper. It's building careers on artifacts. Give them a choice between an extra false negative and one false positive. They'll eat the negative and sleep fine. Then the computational realists. They don't need capital S simulation to make their case. They argue from constraints and compression. If the world is compressible at the right scales, pipelines that penalize simplicity might be scrubbing real structure. They ask whether algorithmic regularities get mislabeled as galactic grime. Their tools look like code reviews of nature, complexity proxies, cross-instrument compression tests, adversarial pipelines where teams try to fool each other with planted patterns at detection threshold. After the freeze, they framed their work as robustness, not metaphysics. Show me that your result survives the harmonized cleaner. Then show me it compresses better than chance across independent instruments. They get side-eyed because compression sounds like simulation. They lean into falsifiability to earn oxygen. Microstories show how incentives pinch. A lab lead with a mid-size grant has 2 figures for a paper deadline. Figure A, looser cleaning, faint concentric candidates pop. Figure B, harmonized defaults, candidates soften. Reviewers will trust B. Press will love A. The lead picks B, writes a footnote about method sensitivity, and mails the report at 1 a.m. They didn't kill a discovery. They paid down risk. A data archivist notices a header flag flip, a new compression setting. They ping the list with a terse note. One reply thanks them. Another says it won't touch publishable scales. Months later, a junior plots a favorite patch and wonders why last year's blip faded. No one ties it to the flag. The log keeps the breadcrumb. The culture moves on. This is how the camps talk past and through one another. Purists say, don't overclean the only signals we couldn't predict. Skeptics say, we're not cleaning signals, we're cleaning wishful thinking. Realists say, test compressibility across hardware before you declare anything noise. They're all right about something. They're all wrong about something. And the 2016 cadence nudged the balance toward the immune system. What does the tug-of-war feel like to a person with a badge? Like a choice between the boulder slide and the trusted one. Like writing 2 titles for the same paper and knowing which one your committee will prefer. Like training students to master standards before you hand them a dangerous tool labeled deviation. You tell yourself you'll come back for the edges when the cycle calms. The cycle doesn't calm. Still, there's a way to keep curiosity alive inside standards. Purists build watch lists of coordinates that survive across cleaners, publishing them as community benchmarks rather than claims. Skeptics expand null suites to include adversarial injections they didn't design, then let other teams take a swing. Realists pre-register complexity thresholds and accept the null when compression equalizes. Each move spends a little trust to buy room at the margin. One more human moment. A committee chair listens to a junior argue for an analysis that needs custom masks. It won't move parameters. It might move how we look. The chair pauses, then splits a tiny carve-out. 5% of compute for hypothesis-negative, standards-deviant work with open notebooks and public code. The junior walks out grinning, then terrified. Standards keep the floor. Curiosity keeps a window. No villains, just reflexes. Geometric purists keep possibility alive. Instrumental skeptics keep the field honest. Computational realists keep us from scrubbing structure we don't yet understand. Together, they shape which echoes survive the cleaner and which die in a footnote. The next question is who's right. It's how to test motives without breaking the room, and what those motives might be if reality favors returns at all. Why build loops? The motives that make sense. If constraints are fingerprints, motives are the grip marks. Why would a world favor returns? Start with the least mystical answer, learning. Evolution iterates because repetition exposes error. Bodies rehearse solutions over generations. Nervous systems run inner simulations before they move. A stable corridor, consistent laws, reliable signals, lets organisms compress experience into fast paths. The pilot's early flare worked because the cockpit's logic never betrays him. If cosmology provides a stable cockpit, constants, symmetries, conservation, then complexity gets a training ground, not a script, a syllabus. Scale that up. Civilizations sharpen judgment inside repeated seasons. Monsoons, markets, migrations. Institutions rehearse drills. Surge teams practice code blues until the hallway feels slower when it's loud. In that sense, loops are kindness. They let feedback land. A universe that permits return in form, not content, grants competence without boring out surprise. Repetition with gradients, not static sameness. Second motive, error correction. Complex systems drift, clocks desynchronize, parameters wander. Computation solves this with frames and checkpoints. Resync, correct, drift, proceed. Physics echoes that pragmatism. Cosmic censorship hides pathologies behind horizons. Holographic bounds cap information per area. Quantization stops unstable infinities. These aren't signatures of a programmer, they're survival rules. They keep dynamics in domains where local causes remain legible. If the world leans toward recoverable order, recurrence in structure follows. Spirals that revisit angles without snapping onto the same point. Third motive, resource economy. Computation costs energy. Memory rights dump heat. Whenever possible, systems reuse. Biology does it with modular genes and repurposed circuits. Culture does it with forms, sonnets, symphonies, protocols, where innovation rides a backbone. Physics does it by giving us low description length laws that generate diverse outcomes. If again appears, it's often because reuse is cheaper than novelty. That can look like a loop. It's really thrift. There's a human twist that stings. If lives recur without memory, moral hazard whispers, why try if it resets? That's the trap. Harm lands once per person and that's enough. Ethics cashes out locally. Still, recurrence raises a duty we usually ignore: design corridors, not just choices. If the hallway repeats, make the repeat safer. Change prompts, add hands, widen margins. Mercy becomes infrastructural. Forgiveness looks like a fresh chance with better guardrails, not a shrug. If someone did design loops, their motives could rhyme with ours. Training across aeons, error correction at the edge, resource budgets on a substrate we can't see. But that's speculation we don't need to run. The observable motives are already here in constraint behavior. The speed of light limit enforces locality. Quantization enforces modularity. Information ceilings enforce honesty about detail. These rules produce reuse because reuse keeps systems from blowing up. If purpose exists, it hides in those constraints. You can test the motive frame without overclaiming. Where learning matters, you should find signatures of practice, decreases in variance under repeated stress when conditions hold, rapid degradation when you scramble Q order. Hospitals see this when a tiny prompt swap cuts repeat errors. Air traffic control sees it when phrasing tweaks shave seconds off wind shear response. That's loop as pedagogy. Where error correction rules, you should see parity checks, protocols that detect drift and reset softly. Grid operators call it islanding. Data teams call it checksums. Where economy reigns, you should measure compression, real signals that summarize better than nulls across independent instruments. If compressibility survives hardware swaps, you've got structure, not sentiment. Micro story. A coastal city ran annual hurricane drills with paper checklists that felt theatrical. After a near miss, they changed one thing: a 3-line stop rule at the top that any radio operator could invoke to pause conflicting orders. The next storm, the loop happened. Same levee, same timing, same evacuation choke. But the stop rule fired twice, and a cascading miscommunication didn't. The city didn't become smarter overnight. The corridor got one guardrail. Practice improved because the loop preserved structure. Motive also explains why harmonization isn't villainy. The 2016 freeze economized scarce resources, compute, time, attention, by reusing trusted cleaners. It implemented error correction, standardized nulls, cross-survey comparability. It created a training arena. Early career researchers could build skill on stable tools. Costs: edge signals starved. Benefits: core results stayed rock. Systems that last tend to choose that trade when energy tightens. There's a boundary we shouldn't cross: forcing glitches to prove a point. Treating neighbors like NPCs is how loops turn toxic. Ethical testing lives in methods, not cities. Stress pipelines, not hospitals. Plant adversarial patterns in synthetic skies, not in supply chains. If the universe has guardrails, we don't get to kick them at human expense. One last reason loops make sense: meaning. Musicians rehearse the same passage to uncover nuances the first run hid. Climbers repeat a route to feel a different wind. Parents read the same book because a child's laugh is new each time. Iteration is where intimacy lives. If reality favors returns, it gives us practice at care. So the motives that fit the evidence are plain. Learn safely, correct drift, economize power, preserve stability, and leave room where value deepens through repetition. Not destiny, design space. Not fatalism, feedback. If we can read motives in constraints, we can steer repeats toward skill instead of rut. And that means picking where we place the next guardrail on purpose. Constraints that feel designed. Start with the speed limit. Light doesn't just move fast, it draws the map of what can talk to what and when. Locality isn't a taste, it's enforced. You can't coordinate the whole field at once. You solve things neighborhood by neighborhood and stitch solutions together. That one rule pushes complex systems toward modularity. Neighborhoods learn, fail, recover, and share recipes. If you were trying to build a world that teaches through repeats without letting one mistake go global, you'd pick a speed limit. Quantization adds the second guardrail. No infinitely fine slides, no atoms that smear into instability. Energy comes in packets, electrons sit in discrete shells, the math holds matter together. Quantization is economy in action, finite tokens, reliable transactions, no runaway decimals that crash the ledger. Reuse becomes natural because the building blocks snap to stable slots. If loops show up, it's because modules let patterns recur without blowing apart. Then the censorship we rarely name outside journals, hide the worst singularities. Whether or not cosmic censorship is universally true, physics behaves like it wants the ugliest infinities veiled behind horizons. That's a design-feeling rule. Let the edge exist, but don't let it dominate the street. Keep causal structure legible so local fixes still work. Where the edge must speak, it whispers through conserved quantities, mass, charge, spin, which is another kind of economy. Information ceilings tighten everything. The Bekenstein bound, the holographic principle, both say a region can't store more information than fits on its boundary, scaled in brutal Planck-area pixels. That's not a metaphor, it's a quota. It tells every modeler, there's only so much detail reality will carry in this box. The practical effect is compression. Summaries are not a convenience, they're a law. When you keep seeing simple descriptions work across domains, waves, exponentials, power laws, you're watching the quota guide reuse. These constraints don't prove code. They make code-like strategies optimal. Low description length laws give you reach. Locality gives you robustness. Quantization gives you stability. Information bounds give you honesty. Combine them and you get motifs that reappear because the rules reward motifs. Lattices, oscillations, branching networks, feedback loops, familiar shapes because the grammar prefers sentences it can keep parsing under stress. You can feel the same hand in measurement. Horizons have temperatures, tiny but real. A de Sitter horizon in a dark energy, dominated space acts like a bath, telling us, there's always an outside you can't access. Observers inside can't rewind everything because they can't even, in principle, see everything. That's a constraint that behaves like purpose. Keep agents local, make them learn with incomplete information, force them to cooperate if they want a bigger picture. Here's a micro story that nails the vibe. A graduate student processing pulsar timing residuals finds a tiny periodic wiggle that survives hardware swaps and 3 different noise models. It's boring to look at and tempting to smooth away. She pins a sticky note to her monitor, "Don't overclean," and writes a short method memo instead of a press pitch. A year later, that wiggle calibrates a gravitational wave background analysis across consortia. The constraint: respect the information ceiling. Don't invent detail you can't support, saved a seed that grew. We can test the fingerprints without myth-making. Probe compressibility at scales your pipeline assumes are smooth. If real data keeps compressing better than nulls across independent instruments, you've found structure your priors missed. Map entanglement-like correlations where none should survive hardware changes. If they do, your local model needs more grammar. Search for constraint-consistent departures, not lattice gods. No hunting for pixels, just measuring whether locality and bounds produce detectable biases in how fluctuations cluster. There's a civic analog. Speed limits in networks create neighborhoods, availability zones, subnets, shards. Quantization shows up as chunked budgets, tokenized access, quoted APIs. Information ceilings are bandwidth caps and retention limits. The same family of constraints that make universes stable keep institutions governable. You feel design because consistency under constraint is what design looks like from inside a working system. Caution matters. Humans backfill motives where selection suffices. Fine-tuning tempts us to declare intention. The safer move is prediction. If constraints are the grammar, we should forecast which sentences the world writes easily and which it stumbles on. Then we go look. When the world writes the easy sentences often, waves across media, networks that scale with branching exponents, error-correcting codes in biology, you're seeing grammar bite. When it struggles, you've found either a new rule or a need for a new metaphor. So constraints that feel designed are better read as rules that reward reuse. They don't script outcomes, they narrow the corridor where outcomes live. That's why repeats show up without a rewind button, and why small, well-placed nudges can bend the path inside limits that hold. The test's how you try to break the loop. If constraints make loops likely, the honest move is to try to break them, on paper first, then in instruments, without mistaking your own fingerprints for cosmic ones. You start boring. Pre-register the questions, publish the pipelines, invite skeptics early and make the null your friend. Test 1. Compression beyond priors. Take long baseline signals, the CMB, pulsar timing arrays, neutrino flux, and lock down a suite of null ensembles that capture everything you know can fake structure. Masks, beam asymmetries, correlated noise, scanning stripes, clock drift. Then run algorithmic complexity proxies on real versus synthetic maps. If real skies keep yielding shorter descriptions than matched nulls across frequencies and instruments that share nothing, raise a flag, not proof. A flag you can try to knock down. Test 2. Cross-hardware recurrence. Hunt low-bit patterns that survive hardware, software, and team culture. Pair microwave maps with radio interferometers, optical surveys with atom interferometers. If a candidate lives in one ecosystem and dies in another, it was you. If it survives diversity, it earns oxygen. Publish survival matrices, not just pretty plots, columns of instruments, rows of methods, cells colored by effect size with confidence intervals. Let the immune system chew. Test 3. Recurrence plots for messy systems. In brains, climate, markets, and hospitals, embed time series in delay coordinates and map when the state revisits nearby neighborhoods. Compare to phase randomized controls that preserve spectra but destroy temporal structure. If revisit density is higher than controls, you've got structured returns. If small, well-designed nudges lower that density disproportionately, you've found leverage points that beat fatalism. That's a loop you can steer, not a doom you have to narrate. Test 4. Adversarial injections at the edge of detectability. Build synthetic skies with planted patterns that barely clear thresholds, low-variance rings, faint spots consistent with CCC-motivated shapes, including Hawking points proposed in later CCC work and debated in recent data, subtle pseudo-random periodicities some sim fans whisper about, and blind them. Do it across consortia. See who finds what, which pipelines overclean, who drowns in false positives. Publish miss rates with the same pride you reserve for hits. A field that can fail publicly is a field that can trust itself near the margins. Test 5. Spectral fingerprints without lattice gods. Don't go hunting for pixel corners, go looking for biases that constraints predict. If space were discretized on a simple grid, Ultra-high-energy cosmic rays might show tiny anisotropies tied to preferred directions. Pre-register the direction families, the statistics, the energy cuts. Accept the null gracefully. Most likely you'll get physics, not code. That nothing is strong. It rules out whole classes of cheap simulations and keeps your imagination from outrunning your evidence. Test 6. Horizon-informed limits on memory. If de Sitter, like horizons cap accessible information, you can model how aggressively any pipeline should compress without erasing recoverable structure. Bake horizon-aware priors into cleaner design, then measure whether horizon-honest compression preserves weak correlations lost by aggressive defaults. If yes, you change standards. If not, you earn confidence that the stricter cleaner didn't kill truth, just romance. Guardrails for all of it: pre-registration, open notebooks, and raw slice preservation. The last one is non-negotiable. Across pipeline freezes, keep tiny, randomly selected raw windows untouched. Those seeds let future teams rerun yesterday without your assumptions. The cost is storage. The value is time travel. Human tests sit beside cosmic ones. Define the same decision before you start. Randomize environments and let trained experts work under pressure. Tweak cue order, phrasing, lighting, or alert tones by hair-thin amounts. If micro-moves yield macro gaps in repeated errors, publish the protocol. State injection beats fatalism. If nothing moves, you change the hallway, not the nurse. Micro-story. A hospital piloted a 5-second breathing cue hardwired into its triage interface before critical choices. Same staff, same policies, same load. Over 8 weeks, repeat impossible choices fell modestly but measurably. No sermons about free will, just a lever placed where compiled code loosens. The team shipped the cue and open-sourced the experiment. 3 other hospitals copied it, 2 saw the effect, 1 didn't. That did matter. It revealed a different bottleneck to fix. Stress test the testers. Run an annual red team season where labs try to fool each other's pipelines with adversarial datasets and plausible artifacts. Score points for defenses and for clean, documented failures. Make it a festival, not a tribunal. Curiosity with teeth. The immune system gets sharper without turning autoimmune. Then one more humility play. Invite time. Set review cadences that reopen assumptions on schedule. Every 2 years, thaw the freeze for a narrowly scoped methods window. Rerun the same sky with one cleaner change and compare. If the margins wiggle in sync across teams, maybe you sharpen standards. If not, you put a stake through a ghost and move on lighter. You'll hear whispers about forcing glitches to out the system. Don't. Ethics first. We test models, not cities, pipelines, not people. If someone can flip our world, they can erase proofs faster than we can brag about them. Our job is to push where it teaches, not where it harms. If a rerun exists, it will leave fingerprints in how easy reality is to summarize and how hard it is to surprise. These tests don't promise revelations. They promise clarity about where the loop lives, where it breaks, and where we still have levers to pull. That's enough. That's how you learn inside a corridor and widen it. Human time, memory, choice, and the feeling of again. From our seat inside the corridor, the loop isn't cosmic, it's a sensation. Déjà vu arrives as a quick shiver of certainty, the sense that the future already happened and is now replaying on time delay. The brain isn't a tape deck. It's a prediction machine that bets on the next frame and then edits its story around the result. When the bet arrives just ahead of conscious indexing, familiarity can masquerade as memory. Here's the wiring in plain terms. The hippocampus works as an indexer, this happened there then. The parahynal cortex monitors texture, familiar or novel. Prefrontal circuits run models, does this fit what should happen next? Under fatigue, anesthesia, or stress, those channels can desynchronize by a blink. The familiarity flag trips early, the index lags. Your model backfills a reason. I've seen this. In reality, your forecast just landed on the nose. That's why experts move like they're remembering. Training compiles tasks into fast paths. The surgeon's hand finds the right plane because 1,000 small cues line up. The pilot flares early because the instrument chorus and the winds push rhyme with hundreds of prior approaches. It feels like recall because, functionally, it is. Built models retrieving patterns faster than you can narrate them. Efficiency misread as fate. Now the trap. When the hallway repeats, responsibility can blur. The corridor chose. That's comforting, it's wrong. Freedom isn't the absence of causes. Freedom is acting from reasons you own. Compatibilism sounds academic until you're tired at 3 a.m. and a critical choice lands in your lap. If the environment stacks cues in the same order, your compiled code will try to run. Agency lives in the gap you pry open to check whether those reasons still fit this version of the room. Micro story. A resident returns to a ward where a patient's chart reads like last month's disaster. Same labs, same monitor flicker, same senior's tone. The dread hits like rehearsal. She feels her mouth prep the same reassurance that turned out hollow. She stops, inhales once, and swaps one sentence. We're going to confirm one thing before we move. 30 seconds, one test, the plan bends. The corridor didn't vanish. The room shifted because she made space. State injection is how you buy that space without heroics. You don't bulldoze the world, you tilt it. Change the order of prompts in a triage UI so the most consequential question arrives first. Teach a 5-second breath cue as the ritual before a code decision. Swap the ringtone for the call that triggers your gut drop. Nudge the entrance and the path through the forest updates. Small levers with low downside and high repeat value. When the loop tries to snap shut, these widen the hinge. Memory is not a vault, it's a studio. Every recall rewrites something, strengthening one path, weakening another. That's why rumination cuts grooves you can't escape and why deliberate rehearsal can reframe the same story into a different future. Sleep consolidates, spacing retains. Elaboration binds new context to old traces so the again becomes less sticky. You can't erase the corridor, you can sand the floor. Meaning doesn't require novelty. Musicians play the same phrase until the room changes temperature. Climbers take the same route to feel a different wind. Parents read the same book because the child's laugh is new each time. Repetition can deepen care. If the universe favors returns, it gives us practice, not only at skill, but at attention. The question becomes which repeats you want to keep. Then ethics. If contexts recur, we owe more than pep talks about grit. We owe better corridors. Accountability expands upward, from individual choice to environment design. The nurse who made the same hard call twice shouldn't face the third in the same hallway with the same staffing and noise. Mercy becomes infrastructural. Forgiveness looks like a fresh chance with a new guardrail, not the demand to perform miracles in a broken loop. You also need guardrails against your own stories. Déjàvu plus stress tempts magical thinking. The universe is telling me. Maybe it's your parahynal cortex shouting early. Anchor yourself with 3 questions. What cue just fired? What habit did it light? What single variable can I tilt right now? Answer, then do it. Change the seat, switch the order, say one different first word. If nothing budges, escalate. Alter the room, not your willpower. Habits are compressed programs and they're stubborn because they're metabolically cheap. You overwrite them with repetition, not epiphany. Set defaults that your tired self can honor. Morning light before screens, a glass of water next to your keys, a standing check-in that catches loops before they harden. Build friction where bad repeats thrive and remove it where good repeats stall. It's not glamorous, it works. Here's the last human truth. The feeling of again is telemetry. It tells you your model is running and your world is regular enough to learn from. Use it as a bell, not a verdict. Keep the repeats that carry your values forward. Disturb the ones that quietly betray them. And when the corridor narrows, because entropy, because policy, because life, let your reasons be the part that doesn't rerun on accident. Steering within constraints. If loops live where predictive brains meet constrained worlds, steering means working that seam. Nudging state so the familiar road bends just enough without blowing a tire. Control theory says 2 simple things. You can't control what you can't observe, and you shouldn't move what you don't need to. In practice, That translates to sensors and tiny actuators, feedback that notices drift, then taps, not shoves. Start close. Pilots stabilize an aircraft in gusts by reading small deviations and applying bounded inputs. They don't rewrite aerodynamics mid-flight, they shape response. You can do the same with time. Build cheap sensors for your own loops, heart rate spikes before a hasty reply, a phrase you always say before you concede too much, the way your jaw tightens right before you overcorrect. Tie each tell to one tiny actuator, a breath, a phrase change, a 30-second pause. The point isn't bravery, it's latency. You're buying a beat where reasons can overwrite reflex. Institutions can do this without drama. A city can't outlaw rivers, but it can add staged friction where floods repeat. Price risk into zoning. Move critical substations above water lines. Retime signals on an evacuation corridor so last time's gridlock doesn't rerun. Micro-stories add up. A transit agency flips one merge rule and a recurring Friday snarl drops. A hospital reverses 2 prompts in a triage UI and repeat errors fall. These are state injections placed where dynamics amplify them. Robust control also tolerates model error. You don't need a perfect map of the loop to steer it, you need safe envelopes. Think don't stall the wing for decisions. Choose interventions with limited downside and measurable upside. 5 seconds of exhale, 2 clicks to change display order, a budget rule that caps exposure without killing initiative. Set tripwires. If a metric crosses a line, revert. Steering inside guardrails is how you move without drama. Friction is leverage when repeats are sticky. Bad loops persist because their path has the least resistance. Add good friction where you want behavior to slow, chargers in another room for late-night scrolls, meeting agendas that force a decision before debate. Remove friction where you want behavior to flow, pre-staged checklists, one-click templates, defaults that your tired self can honor. You're modulating gradients so compiled habits choose better grooves. Emergence is the quiet payoff. Cross soft thresholds and patterns flip. A school district drops busy work in favor of spaced retrieval. 5 years later, retention curves shift and graduation rates creep up because memory consolidated. A traffic department staggers start times on 3 major employers. Rush hour peak flattens because drivers self-organize differently. Not heroics, parameter nudges that move attractors. Incentives decide whether your levers hold. If a hospital only praises fast decisions, it trains staff to sprint the same loop. Change what gets rewarded. Process quality under pressure, near-miss reporting, measured use of the pause. Publish distributions, not just averages. Show how often almost failures cluster and celebrate the catch. Incentive hygiene is steering at scale. Beware over-control. Squeeze variance until nothing moves and resilience dies. Casinos engineer near-wins to lock players inside a loop. Don't casino your systems. Standards protect the spine, but set review cadences that reopen assumptions on purpose. Thaw freezes for narrow methods windows. Let a small, protected budget roam the edges with open notebooks and public code. You need mutation at the margins to keep the center honest. Try a micro-story with teeth. A software org suffered a chronic Friday night incident, same service, same downstream choke. They wrote playbooks, added monitors, still loop. A junior nudged one policy, deployments moved to Wednesday noon with on-call overlap and pizza. Incidents halved immediately. The code didn't improve, the human system stepped out of the worst corner. With bandwidth back, they fixed the root cause. One lever, placed where the corridor amplified it. At the personal scale, the first 5 minutes after waking are a policy window. Light before screens sets circadian clocks. A glass of water and one line in a notebook primes attention. Put your actuator in that space. One question, what repeat am I keeping? One boundary, what loop won't I run today? You'll steer the rest because the attractor moved. Steering within constraints won't turn you into a god of the loop. It turns you into a good driver on a road you didn't pave. You watch gauges. You listen for engine notes. You shift early on the hill. You leave room for the unexpected. If reality reruns, you'll still see the same turns. You'll take them with more grip. and grip is what keeps practice from hardening into fate. The edge case, signals of approaching reset. Watch for rooms that stop breathing. That's the first sign. In healthy systems, small pushes still move things. When resets approach, you spend more heat for less change, more meetings, more compute, more overtime, and the needle barely twitches. Engineers call it falling gain. On the street, it looks like gridlock on a day that isn't even busy. In a lab, it's doubling the training budget for a model that improves by a hair. The graph doesn't scream apocalypse. It whispers, you're out of slack. Brittleness is the next shadow on the wall. Complex networks degrade gracefully until they don't. You can measure how many nodes you can lose before function snaps. When redundancy has quietly been bargained away, small shocks cascade. Microstory. A substation overheats on a mild afternoon. A protective relay trips. A neighboring feeder was already close to limit. 15 minutes later, an entire district is dark. Nothing exotic failed. Margins vanished. Energy plateaus tell the same story in a blunter tongue. Civilizations climb by finding gradients, wood, coal, oil, fish, and sun, and by squeezing more useful work from each joule. When gross capture stalls, efficiency and distribution have to keep rising or complexity hits a ceiling. If both stall, maintenance becomes heroism, then ritual, then myth. Projects slip, repairs defer, managers praise resilience because they can't afford slack. Resets don't need meteors. They feed on the slow loss of gradient. Information ecology gives the third signal, correction half-life. In a healthy environment, error dies faster than rumor spreads. When that flips, societies replay the same argument with new names. You can track it. Replication rates in science, retraction latency, how long a factual correction takes to overtake a viral mistake. If the correction curve keeps lengthening while attention spans short, your system is looping stale air. Instruments show analogous symptoms. Pipelines accrete patches, standards harden. Each change is reasonable. Together, they narrow the corridor of what counts. You notice it when exploratory proposals promise conformity first. You see it when an entire field times releases to an inherited cadence instead of the sky. That's not malice. It's the entropy bill arriving in the form of calendars. Cosmic signs are colder but rhyme. In a dark energy, leaning universe, de Sitter horizons put a soft cap on accessible information. As late-time parameters tighten inside error bars, design space shrinks. You wouldn't declare fate. You would admit the walls are closer than they looked, and that certain bets don't pencil out because no observation can move them within a human career. Competing explanations keep us honest. Stagnation might be demographics, aging populations spend on care, not risk. It might be regulation built for past harms, over constraint as a delayed success. It might be the end of low-hanging fruit, frontiers moved from obvious to gnarly. Or we're mismeasuring value, software and services compound quietly. None of these require a cosmic reset. All of them feel like one from inside the room. So why hold the reset frame at all? Because it changes how you prepare. If resets are metaphysical, you shrug. If resets are thermodynamic and institutional, you work. Preparation is slack built on purpose. Buffers in grids, inventories that aren't just in time, archives that preserve raw slices across policy freezes, teams that stagger schedules so failures don't synchronize. You design graceful degradation, systems that fail soft, not brittle. There's a simple detector you can carry in your pocket: variance. Healthy systems show controlled variability, enough diversity to adapt, enough coupling to coordinate. When variance collapses to a narrow band while errors still rise, you're in a cul-de-sac. When variance explodes without useful novelty, you're in noise. The sweet spot is a moving target. Watch how often your organization produces small, independent wins at the edges. If edge wins vanish, your center is overfitted. Microstory with a human pulse. A hospital reviews incident reports and sees the same near-miss 3 Fridays running, same shift, same corridor, same order set. The fix isn't a lecture. It's a schedule and a screen. Rotate the senior on call to Thursdays, swap the prompt order on Fridays, add a 5-second breath cue before the irreversible click. The following month, the near miss drops. No one prints posters. The room started breathing again. Narratives steer behavior. Tell people they're helpless inside a rerun and you train passivity. Tell them loops are practice and you get drills, checklists, and muscle memory that buys time when gradients collapse. The nurse's corridor replay becomes syllabus, not fate. The pilot's anticipatory flair becomes training, not superstition. The programmer's cached fix becomes automation that frees bandwidth for true unknowns. Here's the hard part. Resets rarely arrive as a single day. They arrive as a narrowing, fewer options, thicker rituals, braver language covering thinner margins. The honest signal is when good people keep working harder for smaller returns, and the only proposals that clear committees are the ones that guarantee comparability. That's the moment to inject state. Thaw a freeze for a narrow methods window. Tithe 5% to hypothesis-negative work. Publish miss rates with pride. Keep untouched raw seeds so the next pass can rerun the past without your fingerprints. Watch for rooms that stop breathing, then put a window in. Resets aren't prophecy, they're pressure. Pressure can be vented, paced, staggered, shared. If the corridor narrows, widen it where you can. Cadence, buffers, defaults, tiny levers that shift big habits. You can't change the arrow. You can keep the room alive long enough to decide what repeats. The central mystery, the policy, the date, the player. The player wasn't a genius in a basement or a billionaire with a bespoke telescope. It was a consortium with a charter, people with calendars, budgets, and a mandate to keep the spine of cosmology trustworthy. Their badge read like a promise: reproducibility, interoperability, responsibility. What they controlled were defaults, and defaults, once adopted across missions, become the air everyone breathes. The policy looked harmless on first read. Harmonize pipelines across surveys, adopt a baseline foreground model, define publication tiers so cosmology results mean the same thing everywhere. Reclassify exploratory anomaly hunts as method development until they pass a formal suite of nulls. The killer clause lived in the middle, standard masks and stricter priors for cleaning. It didn't outlaw curiosity, it raised the toll. You already know the date, October 17, 2016. That was the first big freeze. A flagship team locked its data processing stack and published a clean sky map most of the field would lean on. The power spectrum was stable, the acoustic peaks crisp, the parameter fit solid. The memo framed the freeze as hygiene, protect comparability, reduce false positives, align cross-survey analyses. True, necessary, and consequential. In the room, it landed in 3 slides. Slide 1, Map A legacy flexible cleaning. Slide 2, Map B harmonized defaults. Visually near identical. Slide 3, outputs from a ring detection algorithm and a spot finder. A cluster of low variance candidates dimmed below threshold, a few sharpened, most drifted toward noise. The chair asked, do cosmological parameters move? No. Any sign of mask-induced bias? Not at core scales. The vote was quick. Standards affirmed. Everyone exhaled, grateful to ship something solid. Across the hall, a quieter decision ticked in the logs. A storage-saving patch flipped a compression flag for nightly ingests. The note said it wouldn't affect publishable scales. 2 replies, 1 thanks, 1 shrug. Weeks later, a small team ran a favorite patch and watched a faint ring weaken. They blamed their code. No one reread the flag note. The archivist filed it. The world moved on. Who benefited? Everyone and no one. Geometric purists lost oxygen. The signals they cared about, CCC-style low-variance rings, delicate hot spots some called Hawking points, predicted by CCC, debated in recent data, were exactly the kind that stricter cleaning could flatten. They adapted by publishing recovery methods that survived multiple pipelines, by pre-registering thresholds that wouldn't collapse when defaults shifted, by seeding watch lists of coordinates across consortia as community benchmarks rather than claims. They sounded like romantics. They behaved like engineers under constraint. Instrumental skeptics gained leverage. Their job be the immune system got easier with standards. When a new anomaly appeared, they asked the same litany. Show me it survives the harmonized cleaner, the standard mask, the crossband check, the null sweep. If it shrank, that wasn't censorship, it was hygiene. When the press leaned in, they leaned back to rock, the spectrum, the peaks, the parameters. Fewer false positives, fewer embarrassments, more sleep. Computational realists tried to thread the needle. They argued from compression, not metaphysics. If reality is compressible at the right scales, pipelines that penalize simplicity could be scrubbing real structure. Their move after the freeze was to frame compression as a robustness test, publish complexity proxies, cross-hardware comparisons, adversarial injections at the detection edge. If a low-bit pattern survived independent instruments and standard cleaners, maybe it deserved oxygen. They didn't use the word simulation. They spoke in falsifiable claims. Here's a human-sized moment that caught the policy's grip. A small Southern Hemisphere team working an odd frequency band saw a faint alignment twice with different hardware. Before submission, a senior advisor said, "Run the harmonized cleaner." They did. The signal dipped under their pre-registered line. They published both versions in the supplement, praised transparency, and lost press momentum. 2 years later, funding lapsed. The PI took a job building ML pipelines. He still replays wind, wiring, whisper. Funding panels felt the memo's gravity. Proposals that promised interoperability scored higher. Analyses requiring bespoke masks looked boutique. Students learned the defaults first. Deviation became a specialization you needed political capital to attempt. A committee chair carved out a small, protected budget, 5%, for hypothesis-negative, standards-deviant work with open notebooks and public code. It wasn't rebellion. It was a pressure valve. If you're tempted to hunt villains, check the ledger. The policy protected the field's core. It also narrowed the corridor where whispers live. That's the mystery. A decision designed for stability became a quiet story engine. It didn't pick a cosmology. It picked a lens. Through that lens, CCC-style hints became harder to nurture. Computational compressibility got misread as overfitting, and the immune system grew stronger and sometimes overcautious. What does that mean for our loop? It means the clocks you feel aren't only cosmic, they're institutional. A freeze date can shape which echoes survive longer than any theory talk. The fix isn't to scrap standards, it's to write them with windows. Publish the cadence. Pre-commit to methods thaws. Preserve tiny raw seeds across versions. Reward nulls and misses. Let a narrow sliver roam. October 17, 2016 wasn't a plot twist. It was a beat. A hinge where cadence became policy and policy became the corridor everyone walked. If the universe reruns, this is one of the places the repeat got tighter. The next step isn't outrage. It's design. Name the clock, then move its hands, carefully, so the spine stays rock and the margins can breathe. Consequences if the universe repeats. If repeats are real in any sense that touches us, ethics gets heavier, not lighter. Harm lands once per person, that's enough. Accountability shifts from cosmic bookkeeping to local repair. What we do for the neighbor who bleeds now, not for an abstract future self who won't remember. Justice becomes environment design. Change corridors that keep producing the same harms. Sanctions that alter incentives. Restoratives that rebuild ties. Archives that outlive budget cycles, so the same mistakes don't rebrand as new. Forgiveness changes too. It isn't amnesia, it's a reset with better guardrails. If the nurse faced the same impossible split twice, the third time shouldn't rely on heroics. Add hands, fix prompts, quiet the hallway. Mercy becomes infrastructural, systems that share the burden so values don't burn out inside loops. Science under loops becomes method religion in the best sense. You assume resets erase context, so you build for survival. Open notebooks that travel, raw slice archives that don't vanish in pipeline freezes, redundant repositories stored in boring places. You train judgment, not just tools, so the next pass can rebuild quickly. You praise nulls and misses because they save time later. A documented near ring that dissolves under stricter masks is a gift. It keeps the next team from chasing a ghost. strategy shifts toward compounding. You invest in questions that scale, calibrations, standards, cross-instrument bridges. So even if ambition shrinks in a lean cycle, the spine remains. And you tie the sliver, 5%, to protected weirdness. Hypothesis negative, standards deviant work with open code. Curiosity survives harmonization drift because you budget for it. Culture needs antibodies to keep loops from turning ritualistic. Tell maintenance sagas, not just breakthrough myths. Honor the crews who kept bridges honest, not just the one who sprinted across. Hold an annual What We Stopped Doing Day to prune dead habits. Host Almost Failures talks where teams show near misses and the small levers that caught them. You don't glamorize rule breaking, you celebrate rule changing. Defaults become civilization's steering wheel. Opt-out organ donation saves lives. Auto-enrollment in savings changes poverty curves. Standardized raw data preservation changes science after policy freezes. Most futures get written by defaults. If you sit on a committee, pick the default that helps the tired version of you do the kind thing. Personal practice turns from inspiration to state management. Habits that travel sleep, light in the morning, short reflections, are state injections that make you a better node in every cohort you'll join. One cognitive lever, a 2-minute review each night. What repeated today, what changed, what did that cost? One social lever, a standing check-in with someone trained to ask, what loop are you keeping? One ethical lever, a pre-commitment, published and scripted for your tired self. I won't trade someone else's safety for my urgency. Free will debates calm down here. If loops bias choices, freedom becomes the craft of better biases. You tune toward values on purpose and set environments that make those values the path of least resistance. Agency isn't escaping constraints, it's expressing reasons inside them. When the déjà hits, those reasons carry more weight than the jolt. Meaning doesn't require novelty. Musicians rehearse to find depth. Climbers repeat routes to feel new wind. Parents reread because the child's laugh is new each time. Repetition is how intimacy grows. If the universe favors returns, it's handing us practice. The question is what we practice: care, patience, precision, candor. So the repeats we can't avoid become the ones we choose. There's a civic version of that choice. Publish cadence so others can phase shift and avoid synchronized failures. Stagger schedules, build buffers, keep narrow windows where standards thaw on purpose. Make metadata generous. Reward the people who prove themselves wrong. A culture that learns inside repeats doesn't wait for permission to keep a tiny raw slice. It treats that seed as sacred. And remember the corridor. When the room narrows because energy, because policy, because life, your job isn't to declare fate. It's to widen the part you control. Defaults, prompts, buffers, tiny levers that move big habits. That's not smaller than cosmology. That's cosmology with fingerprints. In a rerunning world, agency isn't escaping the loop. It's choosing what repeats when the corridor narrows. You won't control the arrow, but you can move the hinge. Defaults, prompts, buffers that bend the familiar path. Keep the repeats that carry your values. Disturb the ones that quietly betray them. If the same turns keep arriving, take them with more grip and leave better guardrails for whoever follows. If you want to see where constraints leave fingerprints, and where small levers still move big habits, watch the next investigation. We test compressibility without myth-making and open narrow windows for curiosity. Subscribe to Cosmic Ventures for evidence-rooted stories that keep Penrose's CCC debates, Bostrom's 2003 argument, and black hole information results honest, and for the human levers that turn repetition into practice instead of fate.